New this morning, a major development surrounding the missing Malaysia Airlines flight. Two pieces of debris that washed ashore in Mozambique.
For nearly a decade, the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 has remained one of aviation's greatest mysteries, with countless theories but no definitive answers. Despite exhaustive searches, the wreckage has never been found. Until now, after nearly 7 years of dormancy, the search for MH370 is back on. So what's changed? And more importantly, how probable is it that we come across a wreckage? Today, we'll answer this and much more. Let's start from the very beginning. The global impact of MH370's disappearance. The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 is a global tragedy that continues to haunt the world more than a decade later. The mystery surrounding the flight transcends technical analysis and logistical investigations. It represents the anguish of 239 families who never received closure, the failure of modern aviation to track an aircraft in real time, and the limitations of international cooperation in large-scale search operations. From the moment the plane vanished, it became one of the most perplexing cases in aviation history, sparking extensive multinational search efforts, conspiracy theories, and calls for reforms in air traffic monitoring. Despite satellite data providing a general idea of the plane's trajectory and debris washing up on distant shores, the wreckage itself has never been found. So, will we ever know about the final moments of the flight and its passengers? And will there be closure for the families who have spent years demanding answers? Well, before we move on to that, let's get our facts straight. On that fateful night of March 7, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, a Boeing 777-200ER, departed from Kuala Lumpur International Airport at 12:41 a.m. local time, bound for Beijing, Capital International Airport. The routine red-eye flight carried 227 passengers and 12 crew members, with a diverse mix of nationalities, including 153 Chinese citizens, 38 Malaysians, and passengers from various other countries. Everything appeared normal as the aircraft climbed to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet and followed its designated route northward over the South China Sea. However, what followed next would become one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in modern aviation. At 1:19 a.m., the final known communication from the cockpit was made when the flight's captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, calmly acknowledged Malaysian air traffic control's handover to Vietnamese controllers. His words have now been etched in aviation history. He said, "Good night, Malaysian 370. Just 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., the aircraft's transponder, which is the device that allows air traffic controllers to track a plane's position, was manually switched off near waypoint Igari, an intersection marking the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace. Almost simultaneously, the aircraft deviated sharply from its planned course, turning left and flying southwest, away from its intended path. This deliberate change in direction, coupled with the transponder shutdown, made it nearly invisible to conventional radar systems. For the next hour, the aircraft continued an erratic but seemingly controlled flight path, crossing back over the Malay Peninsula and into the Andaman Sea. Military radar detected it flying along a zigzagging route, with changes in altitude and speed that suggested deliberate navigation rather than an uncontrolled descent. By 2:22 a.m., the plane was last detected on radar west of Penang Island, still moving into the vastness of the Indian Ocean. At this point, it vanished from all known tracking systems. No distress signal or communication was ever received from the pilots. The only clue to the flight's fate came from satellite signals that placed the plane somewhere along an arc stretching into the remote southern Indian Ocean. In the immediate aftermath of its disappearance, confusion and misinformation plagued the search efforts. Initial operations focused on the South China Sea, following the assumption that the aircraft had gone down along its intended route. It was only days later that satellite data revealed the aircraft had traveled in the opposite direction, leading to a massive search shift westward. Over the next few years, multinational search teams scoured thousands of square kilometers of the ocean floor. They deployed deep-sea sonar and underwater drones, but found nothing conclusive. The first confirmed piece of debris, a wing flaperon, was discovered on Réunion Island in July 2015, more than 3,500 kilometers away from the suspected crash zone, confirming the aircraft had indeed ended up in the Indian Ocean. Subsequent debris, including parts of the interior and external panels, washed up on beaches in Mozambique, Madagascar, and Tanzania. Yet the main wreckage and black boxes remained elusive. The loss of MH370 sent shockwaves through the global aviation industry, highlighting critical gaps in air traffic monitoring and crisis management. Families of the victims, frustrated by the lack of answers, campaigned tirelessly for continued searches, refusing to accept the plane's disappearance as an unsolvable mystery. Now, with a new search authorized after years of inaction, there is renewed optimism that technology and fresh insights may finally uncover what happened to MH370. The company leading the effort, Ocean Infinity, has proposed a bold no find, no fee contract. Before we move on to that part, let's try and figure out what happened. What went wrong? The evidence surrounding the disappearance of MH370 strongly suggests that it was not an accident, but rather a deliberate act carried out by someone with extensive knowledge of aviation, air traffic control procedures, and military radar detection. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence is the manual deactivation of the aircraft's transponder, the device responsible for relaying the plane's position to air traffic controllers. A transponder does not simply fail without warning. It must be physically turned off from inside the cockpit. This occurred at precisely 1:21 a.m., just minutes after the final radio communication from the flight crew. The timing of this action is crucial because it happened exactly at the point where Malaysian Air Traffic Control was handing off the flight to their Vietnamese counterparts. This created an immediate gap in oversight, as neither side would have been actively tracking the plane in those critical moments. It was a precise move that exploited a known vulnerability in air traffic monitoring, allowing the aircraft to slip away unnoticed for several minutes. Adding to the suspicion is the aircraft's sudden and deliberate deviation from its planned route. Instead of continuing its course toward Beijing, the plane made a sharp left turn, veering southwest over the Malay Peninsula. This maneuver was not the result of mechanical failure or autopilot misconfiguration. It was a controlled turn executed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The flight path then continued in an erratic but purposeful manner, with multiple course changes that demonstrated a clear understanding of navigation. Notably, the aircraft flew directly over the Strait of Malacca and into the Andaman Sea, avoiding well-monitored commercial flight corridors. This trajectory suggests a calculated attempt to evade detection rather than a pilot struggling with an emergency situation. Moreover, the aircraft carefully avoided entering Thailand's air defense identification zone in a manner that would have immediately triggered military scrutiny. Instead of crossing directly into Thai airspace, the aircraft skirted along its border, staying just outside the zone while remaining within Malaysian-controlled airspace. This maneuver bought the plane additional time before military radars in the region could detect anything suspicious. It indicates that whoever was in control had a deep understanding of regional military radar coverage and how to exploit blind spots. This was clearly not a random act, but a meticulously planned operation executed by someone with expertise in both civil and military aviation protocols. These findings strongly contradict the theory that MH370 suffered a catastrophic mid-air failure or was the victim of an unforeseen accident. A sudden structural failure would not have resulted in the plane flying for hours along a controlled trajectory. Likewise, pilot incapacitation due to depressurization or mechanical failure would have resulted in the plane either continuing on autopilot along its original path or crashing within a short period. Instead, the aircraft continued flying for several more hours, indicating that it was being manually controlled for a significant portion of the time before it disappeared over the Indian Ocean. This, Combined with the precise deactivation of the transponder, the strategic timing of the flight path changes, and the ability to avoid military detection, suggests that MH370's disappearance was not a random tragedy but an intentional act from a prepared party. However, without definitive proof, implicating any individual is out of the question for now, but there's more we need to look at. The ACR's communication blackout, MH370's Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, or ACR's transmissions, were also suspiciously severed. ACARS is an automated system that relays critical flight data, such as fuel levels, engine performance, and maintenance alerts, back to ground stations. At 1:07 a.m., MH370 sent its final ACRS transmission while flying over the South China Sea. The next scheduled update, due at 1:37 a.m., never arrived. This indicates that ACARS had either been manually shut off or lost power entirely. Given that the aircraft continued flying for several more hours, a complete power failure is highly unlikely. Instead, the system was almost certainly disabled deliberately. Following the loss of ACRS transmissions, ground stations attempted to communicate with MH370 through routine ACRS messages, but no response was received. This suggests that the system had not merely malfunctioned, but was intentionally disabled to prevent automatic tracking. Disabling ACARS on a Boeing 777 is not as simple as flipping a switch. It requires specific knowledge of the aircraft's avionics. The system is typically housed in an electronics bay beneath the cockpit, an area not accessible to passengers. This means the person responsible was almost certainly one of the pilots or someone with inside access to the aircraft's systems. Furthermore, ACARS operates independently of the transponder, meaning its loss of signal was a separate event from the transponder being switched off. If ACARS had failed due to an onboard electrical issue, other vital systems, such as cabin lighting, autopilot, and flight controls, would likely have been affected. However, radar data shows that the aircraft continued to maneuver for hours after the ACRS blackout, meaning power was still available. This rules out a catastrophic electrical failure as the cause. A total power failure would have triggered the deployment of the ram air turbine, or RAT, a backup generator that automatically restores some electrical functions. However, this did not happen, further proving that ACARS was manually deactivated rather than lost due to an emergency. Additionally, MH370's auxiliary power unit and engine-driven generators could have provided power for critical systems even if an electrical problem had occurred. The only plausible explanation for ACARS ceasing transmissions without other failures occurring is that it was deliberately turned off. Adding to the mystery is the fact that over 20 minutes after the ACARS blackout, the aircraft's satellite communication system, or SATCOM, was manually reactivated. This raises a critical question. If the aircraft was experiencing an uncontrolled emergency, why would SATCOM be turned off and then turned back on again? Clearly, whoever was in control of the aircraft had the ability to manipulate multiple onboard systems and was actively managing the situation rather than dealing with a technical failure. The deliberate manipulation of ACARS and SATCOM suggests a high level of technical understanding. A typical pilot does not routinely disable ACARS mid-flight, nor do they have any operational reason to do so. Disabling ACARS ensured that the aircraft could not be tracked from the ground, making it easier for the plane to disappear without immediate detection. This, combined with the aircraft's evasive flight path and avoidance of military radar, further supports the theory that MH370's disappearance was not an accident, but an intentional act. But the suspicions don't end here. The 7 handshakes and their importance. One of the most critical pieces of evidence in the disappearance of MH370 is the series of automated satellite handshakes exchanged between the aircraft and the Inmarsat satellite network. These handshakes, also known as pings, were automated status signals sent by the plane's SATCOM or satellite communication system. Even though ACRs had been disabled and the transponder was turned off, these handshakes continued for nearly 7 hours after MH370 vanished from radar. These handshakes occurred approximately once per hour and were essential in reconstructing the aircraft's possible flight path. The first handshake after the plane's disappearance occurred at 2:25 a.m. when the SATCOM system unexpectedly reconnected to the Inmarsat satellite. Someone on board probably restored power manually to the satellite communications system after it had been previously shut off. Following this reactivation, 6 more handshakes were recorded at regular intervals, confirming that MH370 was still in the air for hours after it lost contact with air traffic control. Although they do not include precise location data, the pings allow investigators to estimate the plane's distance from the satellite at the time of each handshake. By analyzing the time delay between the signals and their reception by the satellite, experts were able to determine 2 possible flight corridors, one heading north towards Central Asia and the other heading south into the Indian Ocean. Of these, the southern corridor was the most likely path. The first handshake at 2:25 a.m. suggests an intentional reactivation of SATCOM, which would not have happened in the event of an uncontrolled emergency or power failure. The last recorded handshake occurred at 8:19 a.m., nearly 7 hours after the plane disappeared from radar. This final signal indicated that the aircraft was still powered and operational. However, there was no subsequent handshake an hour later, which strongly suggests that the plane ran out of fuel and lost power sometime after the final ping. Another key detail in the satellite data is an abnormal partial handshake detected at 8:19 a.m., just before the last full handshake. This partial handshake could indicate a power fluctuation or an attempted system reboot, possibly caused by the aircraft running on its last reserves of fuel. If the engines had flamed out due to fuel exhaustion, the auxiliary power unit would have briefly provided backup power, allowing one final handshake before a complete loss of communication. This aligns with the theory that MH370 ultimately crashed into the remote southern Indian Ocean after running out of fuel. So, where do we look for it? And more importantly, why the renewed search now? The renewed search for MH370 comes after nearly a decade of unanswered questions, and it is driven by significant advancements in technology, fresh analyses of existing data, and growing pressure from the victims' families and aviation experts. For years, the search was hindered by the vastness and remoteness of the suspected crash site in the southern Indian Ocean. However, recent breakthroughs in satellite imagery analysis and ocean floor mapping have provided new hope that the wreckage can finally be located. Cutting-edge improvements in synthetic aperture radar, or SRR, and machine learning algorithms have enabled researchers to reanalyze satellite data from the time of the disappearance with greater accuracy, potentially revealing new clues about the aircraft's final trajectory. Additionally, advancements in sonar imaging and underwater drones now allow for more precise and efficient deep-sea searches than were possible during previous efforts. One of the most critical factors in the renewed search effort is a new analysis of drift patterns from debris linked to MH370 that washed up on African shores and islands in the western Indian Ocean. Since 2015, confirmed pieces of the aircraft, such as the flaperon found on Réunion Island, have provided valuable insight into the ocean currents that carried them across thousands of kilometers. Experts have since refined their models to trace the debris back to its likely origin, narrowing down potential crash sites. Recent studies have applied advanced oceanographic simulations to reassess these drift patterns with greater precision. In addition to technological advancements, growing demands from victims' families and the aviation community have also played a significant role in reviving the search. Relatives of the 239 passengers and crew members have consistently pushed for continued efforts to locate the plane, arguing that the search should not be abandoned until definitive answers are found. The aviation industry, meanwhile, remains deeply concerned about the unresolved nature of the case as understanding what happened to MH370 is crucial for preventing similar tragedies in the future. The incident exposed vulnerabilities in modern air traffic surveillance and raised urgent questions about safety protocols, prompting calls for more transparency and accountability in aviation investigations. A key development in the renewed search is the confidence expressed by the private search company leading the effort. Ocean Infinity, the firm responsible for the most recent search in 2018, has indicated that it is ready to return to the Indian Ocean with an improved methodology and a no-find, no-fee arrangement. This means that the company will only receive payment if it successfully locates the wreckage. The firm's latest fleet of autonomous underwater vehicles is equipped with higher resolution sonar and artificial intelligence-assisted mapping, enabling a more efficient and thorough examination of the seabed. Ocean Infinity's high-stakes search effort. Ocean Infinity's renewed search for MH370 is a high-stakes endeavor, both financially and reputationally. The company stands to receive $70 million if it successfully locates the wreckage of the missing aircraft, but if the search proves fruitless, it will receive nothing. This no-find, no-fee arrangement means that Ocean Infinity is shouldering immense financial risk. Unlike earlier government-funded missions, which involved massive expenditure with no guaranteed results, this privately led search is driven by advanced technology, strategic planning, and a strong belief in a breakthrough. With such a high payout on the line, Ocean Infinity has a vested interest in conducting the most efficient and thorough search possible. The company has already invested millions in equipping its fleet with autonomous underwater vehicles, remotely operated vessels, and high-resolution sonar systems. These cutting-edge tools allow for unprecedented ocean floor mapping, even in the challenging depths of the South Indian Ocean. However, maintaining a fleet of ships and search equipment in one of the most remote and inhospitable regions of the planet is a costly undertaking. Ocean Infinity will need to sustain operations for up to 18 months, an extended period that requires meticulous logistical planning, constant maintenance of its vessels, and a highly skilled team capable of handling deep-sea search operations in unpredictable conditions. Beyond the financial risks, Ocean Infinity's reputation is also at stake. The company has built its name on successful deep-sea recovery missions, including the discovery of the Argentinian submarine ARA San Juan and the lost bulk carrier Stella Daisy. A successful MH370 search would make it the global leader in deep-sea search and recovery operations. However, failure to locate the aircraft could deal a significant reputational blow. The initial search for MH370 was an unprecedented effort that spanned multiple regions and involved extensive collaboration among nations. Initially, efforts focused on the South China Sea, where the aircraft last communicated with air traffic control. However, military radar later revealed that MH370 had veered westward, shifting the search to the southern Indian Ocean, a vast remote area with depths exceeding 4,000 meters and challenging underwater terrain. Despite aerial sweeps, surface searches, and advanced sonar scans, the wreckage remained elusive. The lack of real-time tracking further complicated efforts, as investigators had to rely on fragmented satellite data to reconstruct the aircraft's final trajectory. The official search was called off in 2018, but advancements in technology have since renewed hopes. However, the automated handshake pings provided crucial clues about the aircraft's movement, forming 7 concentric arcs that estimated its trajectory into the Indian Ocean. Investigators used burst timing offset or BTO calculations to measure signal travel time and determine MH370's distance from the satellite at different intervals. Burst frequency offset or BFO data further helped analyze the Doppler shift in signals, indicating the aircraft's direction and speed. Together, these methods ruled out the possibility of a northern flight path, as no radar detections occurred in monitored airspace over India or China. Instead, experts concluded that the plane continued southward until it ran out of fuel. Recent refinements in drift pattern analysis have further narrowed the probable crash site, making the current search more precise than previous efforts. In fact, there are a lot more reasons to be hopeful. Further analysis of flight paths and new data contributions. The ongoing analysis of MH370's flight path has been significantly influenced by independent experts who have used new methodologies and data sources to refine the search area. Richard Godfrey, an avionics engineer, for instance, has introduced a groundbreaking approach using Weak Signal Propagation Reporter, or WSPR, data. WSPR is a global network used for monitoring radio signals, which can be affected by aircraft flying through their transmission paths. Godfrey hypothesizes that MH370's movements could have disturbed these signals in a detectable way, allowing for an additional data-driven reconstruction of its flight path. By correlating WSPR data with Inmarsat satellite handshakes and ocean drift analysis, he has proposed an even more precise estimate of where the wreckage might be found. Godfrey's analysis has suggested that MH370 followed a holding pattern maneuver at one stage of its journey, potentially indicating that the person controlling the aircraft was deliberately prolonging the flight before continuing south into the Indian Ocean. This aligns with other evidence suggesting that whoever was in control of the aircraft possessed significant aviation expertise. His work has also contributed to narrowing the search area, reinforcing the need for renewed efforts in the southern Indian Ocean. The Weak Signal Propagation Reporter, or WSPR system, was originally developed by Professor Joseph H. Taylor Jr., a Nobel Prize-winning astrophysicist, as a tool for testing and studying the behavior of radio signal propagation. USPR operates as a global network of low-power radio transmissions, allowing amateur radio operators to monitor and analyze how signals travel through the atmosphere under varying conditions. While its initial purpose was unrelated to aviation, researchers have discovered that USPR data may hold valuable clues regarding the final flight path of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. The principle behind WSPR tracking lies in how radio waves interact with physical objects. As a signal propagates through the atmosphere, any large object, such as an aircraft, can disrupt its transmission, creating detectable anomalies in the data. Because WSPR signals are continuously transmitted and recorded, these anomalies remain preserved in historical datasets, enabling investigators to retrospectively analyze past events and track airborne objects, even in areas without radar coverage. WSPR data is conveniently stored in an extensive online database, with records dating back to 2008. This allows researchers to revisit historical transmissions and investigate whether aircraft movements, such as those of MH370, left detectable signatures in the radio signals. By correlating these disruptions with known aviation data, researchers can potentially reconstruct missing portions of MH370's flight path with a level of detail previously unattainable through conventional methods. Richard Godfrey has pioneered its application in tracking the missing aircraft. By analyzing thousands of recorded WSPR signals from the night of March 7 to 8, 2014, Godfrey has identified patterns of interference that align with MH370's presumed trajectory over the Indian Ocean. This novel technique provides a supplementary method for verifying previous flight path estimations. However, not everyone is on board with the idea. One of the primary concerns raised by critics is that WSPR signals were originally designed for monitoring radio wave propagation conditions, not tracking moving objects like aircraft. Since WSPR operates at extremely low power and detects weak signals, some experts argue that its ability to reliably distinguish disruptions caused by an aircraft from normal atmospheric interference is questionable. Additionally, because the system was not built with real-time tracking capabilities in mind, skeptics doubt whether historical WSPR data can provide a precise enough flight path to be used as conclusive evidence in the MH370 search. Despite these doubts, passive radar systems do exist that successfully track aircraft using reflected radio signals. In traditional passive radar technology, ambient radio signals, such as those from television and FM radio stations, are bounced off aircraft and analyzed to determine their movement. Unlike conventional radar, which actively emits signals, passive radar relies on external signal sources to detect and track targets. The key distinction with WSPR is that it was never intended to function as a passive radar, yet its recorded anomalies might still hold valuable information about aircraft movements if properly analyzed. So, what do we know with all this evidence? According to conventional satellite and radar data, after deviating from its planned route near waypoint Igari, which is an intersection marking the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace, MH370 made a sharp left turn, crossed the Malay Peninsula, and then took a northwest course over the Andaman Sea before ultimately turning south. The assumed direct southward track was based on Inmarsat's burst timing offset, or BTO, and burst frequency offset, or BFO data, which suggested a continuous descent into the ocean. However, Godfrey's WSPR analysis challenges this assumption by proposing that the aircraft did not follow a straight-line course, but instead made multiple deviations. This was done possibly to evade detection by other aircraft or to extend its flight duration. One of the most striking findings from Godfrey's reconstructed flight path is the suggestion that MH370 executed a figure-8 maneuver in its final moments before impact. This unusual flight pattern contradicts the widely accepted theory that the aircraft was in an uncontrolled dive due to fuel exhaustion. Instead, the figure-8 path implies that the aircraft was still being actively piloted near the end of its journey. Some experts have speculated that such a maneuver could indicate an intentional search for nearby ships, suggesting that whoever was controlling the aircraft wanted to ensure it crashed unseen. Godfrey's data also suggests that MH370 may have altered its course to avoid known air traffic routes, reinforcing the idea that the flight's disappearance was a deliberate act rather than a random occurrence. Despite these intriguing revelations, Godfrey's WSPR-based findings remain controversial. The flight path he reconstructed relies on a method that has not yet been widely accepted in aviation investigations. However, recent studies have compared WSPR data with information retrieved from Captain Zaharieh Ahmad Shah's home flight simulator. Investigators previously discovered that Zaharieh's home computer contained a simulated flight path leading deep into the southern Indian Ocean, similar to the trajectory later inferred from Inmarsat satellite data. However, at the time, the simulation was dismissed as circumstantial evidence, as it did not exactly match MH370's last known movements. However, Godfrey's WSPR data shows that there is a shockingly similar alignment at two crucial points. Naturally, many have come to believe that MH370's disappearance may have been planned in advance. If this connection between the simulated flight path and the reconstructed WSPR trajectory is accurate, it could significantly impact future search efforts. These findings also introduce new questions for further investigation. If Zaharieh's flight simulation was indeed a test run for the actual flight, then investigators may need to reassess other data from his personal devices to look for additional clues about his intentions and planning process. Furthermore, this revelation raises doubts about earlier theories that MH370's final moments were caused by a loss of control. In any case, Ocean Infinity, armed with advanced technology and improved data analysis, is confident that it can pinpoint the aircraft's final resting place. For now, all we can do is wait. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.